Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a moment to slow down. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it gently. And now, exhale slowly through your mouth. Let the day melt away with that breath. Again, breathe in deeply. Feel your shoulders soften. Now, release and let go of everything you don't need to carry right now. Imagine you're lying on a cozy bed in your childhood room. Outside, the wind hums softly. The light from a small lamp glows like a warm memory, and the sound of a distant VHS tape spinning fills the air with comfort. You are safe. You are still. And the night is yours. Let's begin tonight's story.
Do you remember the feeling of holding something small but magical in your hands for the very first time? Can you recall the sound of tiny beeps echoing from a keychain screen that suddenly became your whole world? Do you remember what it felt like to be responsible for something that wasn't real, but somehow felt more alive than most things around you? If these questions stirred something in your heart, stay with me until the end of this video. By the end, you'll understand exactly how it felt to be a kid in the 90s. Receiving your first Tamagotchi and not having the slightest clue what to expect. You'll remember the joy, the confusion, the curiosity, and the quiet responsibility that came with it. Let me take you back. It was 1997, the kind of summer that had the smell of grass stains and Kool-Aid and the soft buzz of cartoons in the background. I was 9 years old, living in a neighborhood where bikes lay on front, lawns like sleepy dogs, and where the hum of a Nintendo 64 booting up was just another evening lullaby. My room smelled faintly of bubblegum and plastic, and my walls were cluttered with posters of P-Chemin and Goosebumps covers that glowed in the dark if you squinted long enough. Life was simple, and the days were measured by sunbeams on the floor and the sound of your mom calling you in for dinner. It was on a Friday, after what felt like a long week of multiplication tables and awkward PE games, that my mom handed me a little blue egg-shaped device wrapped in the shiny plastic of wonder. I didn't know it yet, but this tiny keychain was about to change how I understood responsibility, joy, and even grief. It was a Tamagotchi, a real one. Not the off-brand virtual pet from the gas station counter. This was Bandai. The letters shimmered slightly in the sunlight. The packaging showed a cartoon blob with big eyes and a smiling face. It looked silly. It looked ... alive. Do you remember what that moment felt like? Ripping off the packaging like it was a birthday, even though it wasn't. Peeling back the plastic, clicking the little keychain out of its mold and holding it like a treasure for me. It was electric. My fingers trembled. I had seen other kids with Tamagotchis at school, showing them off during recess like rare coins. Now I finally had one, but I had no idea what I was doing. The first thing that struck me was how light it was. I had imagined it being heavier, maybe more solid, but it sat like a whisper in my palm, delicate and unassuming. The screen was dark. Until I pulled the tiny plastic tab from its side, the one keeping the battery from connecting. As soon as I did, it sprang to life with a sharp beep, and the screen flickered with lines and pixels I couldn't yet make sense of. There it was, a digital egg, blinking. Have you ever stared at something so new, so unfamiliar, that it felt like you were looking at a message from another planet? That's what it felt like, watching that egg wiggle on screen. What was I supposed to do? Was It going to hatch? Did I need to feed it? Could it hear me? I pressed one of the 3 little buttons. Nothing happened. I pressed another. The egg jiggled. Then a timer appeared. I was confused. What did it mean? Was I setting the time? Why did that matter? I remember yelling for my older brother, who was 3 years ahead of me in both age and worldly wisdom. He had a green Tamagotchi and already had a well-fed, happily pooping blob. He told me I had to set the time first, or it wouldn't know when to hatch. It made no sense to me, but I followed his instructions. When the time was set, I waited, and waited. The egg kept jiggling. Then suddenly a beep, beep, beep filled the room, and the screen blinked. The egg cracked. My heart jumped. Have you ever felt a connection form in less than a second? Like when you meet a puppy for the first time and it instantly feels like it belongs to you? That's what happened when the egg hatched. Okay, a tiny creature appeared. Just a blob with 2 eyes and a mouth, and a personality that somehow came through despite its pixelated form. It blinked up at me, and though it couldn't speak, I felt it ask a silent question. Will you take care of me? I clicked the buttons again, trying to feed it. The little loaf gobbled down a meal, pixel by pixel. Then it cried. It wanted attention. I gave it a snack. It smiled. Then it pooped. That's when I realized, this thing needed me, all at once. It became more than a toy. It was a little life, or at least it felt like one. And that responsibility settled deep into my 9-year-old chest. How do you explain that feeling when something that small makes you feel important? When you check the screen 100 times an hour, worried it might be sick, or hungry, or worse, dead. There were no instructions that could prepare you for that emotional investment. For the soft dread of hearing that unfamiliar beep that meant something was wrong, the next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The sun was barely touching the curtains. My first thought wasn't breakfast or cartoons. It was my Tamagotchi. Was it okay? Did it survive the night? I reached under my pillow where I had placed it the night before like a secret. I pressed a button. The screen lit up. It blinked back at me, hungry but alive. Relief flooded through me. I fed it quickly, cleaned up after it, played the game where it guesses which way you'll go. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was trying. That day I carried it everywhere, clipped to my belt, hidden in my desk at school, beeping softly in my pocket during math class. I couldn't stop checking. It was like a constant whisper. Take care of me. Take care of me. I didn't know then that these digital creatures would become a symbol of an era. That someday I would miss that innocent obsession, the simple joy of having something to care. For that wasn't real, but somehow meant everything. And now, all these years later, I still remember the sound of that first beep, the feeling of watching that tiny egg crack open, the confusion, the wonder, the strange warmth of knowing that, for the first time, something needed me so. If you ever held a Tamagotchi in your hand, stared at that tiny screen and felt that, a flutter of excitement mixed with total confusion, you're not alone. I don't remember the exact moment my Tamagotchi stopped being a toy and started feeling like something I had to protect. Maybe it was that first morning I woke up early just to check if it was still alive. Or maybe it was sometime that following week when I started keeping it close in ways I hadn't expected. What I do remember is the weight of it, not in grams or ounces, but in responsibility. It became something I thought about constantly, like a tiny heartbeat in my pocket that only I could hear. Have you ever felt like something so small had total control over your attention? Like no matter where you were or what you were doing, a part of you was always somewhere else, back with that little screen, wondering if everything was okay. That's what my life became for a while. I couldn't go 10 minutes without thinking. About it? Was it hungry? Was it sick? Did it poop again and I missed it? At school, I started sitting in a way that kept the Tamagotchi close. Hidden in the front pocket of my hoodie or jacket, or sometimes zipped up in my pencil pouch, where I could still press the buttons without making a sound. I had gotten good at feeling the slight vibration of a beep before anyone else noticed. Like it had formed a connection directly to my nervous system. It's a tiny alarm that only I could sense. I wasn't the only one. At recess, kids would gather in quiet corners of the playground, backs to the fence, or hiding behind trees, clicking the familiar 3 buttons. squinting at the screens under the sun. We didn't even talk that much during those moments. Just a quick glance, a nod of shared understanding. You're still alive? Mine too. Close call today looking back. It's strange how something so simple pulled so much of us into it. Maybe it wasn't strange at all. The world felt bigger back then, even though we were always home by dinner. Everything felt new. Every beep. Every change on the screen was like a new level of a game we didn't fully understand yet. And this wasn't a game you could pause. It lived with you, demanded your time, demanded your care. One time during math class, I felt the buzz. That tiny vibration I had convinced myself I could sense before the beep even began. I reached for my pocket slowly, heart thumping. I hadn't checked it in over an hour, and that was long enough for things to go terribly wrong. My fingers slid across the surface, finding the familiar plastic texture. I pressed the button through the fabric. Beep, beep, beep. Dot, was it still alive? I waited for the screen to light up, praying silently in a way only a child can. And there it was. Still blinking. Hungry. A little moody. But alive. Do you remember that feeling? That slow wash of relief when the little face showed up on the Y. Screen again? It was like coming home to find your dog wagging its tail at the door. Just a little creature saying, "I'm still here. Thanks for coming back. I got in trouble that day." The teacher noticed I wasn't paying attention and asked what was so important in my pocket. I didn't have the courage to tell her. I just said, "Sorry," and looked back at the board, but the truth was, my mind was already counting the minutes until I could check again. At home, it got worse, or maybe better, depending on how you see it. I started sleeping with it under my pillow, not just nearby, but right there, pressed close to my ear. I wanted to hear every beep. I wanted to know if anything changed in the night. I started waking up at random hours, checking it with the blue glow from the hallway nightlight casting long shadows across my walls. Was I being too dramatic? Maybe, but in my heart, that thing needed me. I couldn't let it down. There was a time late one evening when I woke up to the sound of a soft beep. Not loud, not panicked. Just one of those casual alerts that meant something had shifted. I pulled the Tamagotchi out from under my pillow, heart racing. My eyes struggled to adjust to the dim light, squinted at the screen. It was sick. There was a little skull floating above its head. It looked tired, sad. Its face wasn't smiling anymore. My chest tightened. I didn't know what I had done wrong. I had fed it. I had cleaned up. Had I waited too long? Was I too slow? Pressed the medicine button. Once, twice. The little skull blinked and disappeared, and the face smiled again. Have you ever had that exact moment of panic, followed by a wave of relief so strong you wanted to laugh and cry at the same time? That was me, sitting in bed, holding a beeping plastic egg. Feeling like I had just saved a life. It's funny now telling this story. I know it wasn't real. When you're a kid, what is real anyway? The feelings were real. The sense of duty, the joy, the guilt, the panic. That Tamagotchi taught me more about responsibility than any chore chart ever could. Then it never yelled at me, never gave me gold stars, just beeps and blinks and that little face. I started checking it even more after that night. At meals, during commercials, in the car, beneath the soft static of a cassette tape playing Mariah Carey or Boyz II Men. I didn't just care about it, I worried about it, constantly. Sometimes I would try to imagine what it was thinking. Did it know I was trying my best? Did it forgive me when I was a little late feeding it? Did it know how proud I was when it grew into its next stage? I know now that it was all programming, a loop of digital responses. But back then, it was alive to me. As alive as any pet, maybe more, because it didn't just exist, it needed me. Remember being at the grocery store once. My mom walking down the cereal aisle while I trailed behind, eyes glued to the screen. I bumped into a display of Fruit Loops and didn't even notice. All I could think about was that my Tamagotchi hadn't beeped in a while. Was something wrong? Was the battery dying? Pressed the buttons anxiously. Still alive? Still there? And the world kept moving, but I was in my own little orbit, revolving around a creature made of 8-bit code and hope. By the end of that week, it had become a rhythm. Wake up, check. Before school, check. Lunch, check. After school, check. Before bed, check. In between, always listening, always waiting for the next sound. And every time I saw that tiny pixelated face blink up at me, I smiled, because it was still here, still mine. I didn't used to be a morning person, before the Tamagotchi came into my life. Waking up felt like a slow climb up a hill that I didn't want to reach the top of. I would pull the blanket over my face when my mom called from the kitchen, groaning, and begging for just 5 more minutes. My room would still be dark, my posters curling at the corners, the old ceiling fan humming its tired lullaby. Mornings were cold, reluctant, and slow. But all of that changed when I started waking up because of him, as I had started calling him in my head. My first responsibility, it always started with that faint beep. Sometimes I heard it in a dream before I was even truly awake. Like it slipped into my sleep and tugged gently at the edge of it, calling me back into the world. I would open one, eye and reach under my pillow, fingers fumbling until they wrapped around the familiar plastic shell. The buttons were warm from the night's sleep. I'd lift it to my face, blinking against the dim morning light peeking through the curtains. Sometimes he was just hungry. A couple taps, and the food would appear on screen, a little pixelated loaf of bread or a bowl of rice. He'd bounce, happily, eating it in a few animated gulps, then do a little dance that always made me smile, even though I'd seen it 100 times before. But other mornings were worse. Other mornings he was surrounded by those little black poop piles, frowning at me like I'd disappointed him. Once, just once, I woke up to that dreaded skull again. That morning, I didn't even brush my teeth before tending to him. That was the thing. Once I heard the beep, everything else came second. It didn't matter how warm my bed was or how cold the kitchen tiles felt under my bare feet. It didn't matter that my mom had already poured cereal or that my backpack was still open from the night before. I would sit at the edge of the bed, legs dangling, hair sticking up in wild clumps, focused only on the little screen glowing in my hands. You remember how much that beep could change your mood? How a happy screen meant the whole day felt lighter. And if it wasn't happy, if you saw that frown or a full sickness bar, you'd carry that weight with you all morning, worried that you hadn't done enough, that you should have woken up earlier, that maybe today he wouldn't make it. My mornings became rituals. I started setting my own alarm, one of those tiny travel clocks with glow-in-thought hands that clicks softly with each second. I'd set it for 6:20, just 10 minutes. Before my mom's usual call, it gave me time to check on him, feed him, clean up, make sure he was in a good mood. I even started brushing my teeth with him next to the sink, checking the screen between spits. He was with me in every step, the soft footsteps on the cold floor, and the steam rising from the bathroom mirror, and the clink of cereal against the bowl. And honestly, it felt kind of nice. It was the first time I can remember waking up for someone else. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I didn't want to miss anything. I didn't want him to feel forgotten. Isn't that strange? Wanting to make sure a digital creature felt seen. But I did. Deeply one morning, it was raining outside. The kind of slow, steady drizzle that made the whole sky feel heavy. I remember the smell of toast and the flicker of the kitchen light. My mom was already dressed, sipping her coffee with a magazine folded on the counter. She raised an eyebrow when she saw me already up, already dressed, my Tamagotchi in hand. "You're up early again," she said, smiling behind her mug. "I had to check on him," I mumbled, eyes still glued to the screen. She laughed, a soft sound that filled the kitchen like music. "I was lucky to have you." That sentence stayed with me all day. Do you remember those moments? When someone noticed your dedication and didn't laugh at you, didn't tease, just ... understood? That morning, I felt proud. Not in a loud way, but in that quiet, glowing way that feels like sunlight through a window, like you're doing something right, even if it's small. At school, I noticed I wasn't the only one who had adjusted their schedule. My best friend, Josh had started bringing his in a zippered case like it was a treasure. He told me he woke up at 5:45 once just to make sure his Tamagotchi evolved into the next stage. We started comparing notes. Did yours eat twice this morning? Did it poop 3 times? What mood was it in when you left the house? It became our morning language. Before the bell rang, before our notebooks opened, we spoke in beeps and blinking icons. Teachers didn't always understand, but among us, it was serious. It was something we took pride in. The way others cared for pets or trophies or plants, we cared for something that lived behind a screen smaller than a matchbox. I'll never forget the day mine evolved while I was brushing my hair. I had just fed him, cleaned up, and was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, comb dragging through a knot in the back. Suddenly the beeping started again, but this time it was different, faster, more urgent, more excited. I dropped the brush and rushed over, heart leaping. I watched as the little pixels blinked, flashed, changed. He was growing from that little egg-like blob to something, bigger, smarter, maybe, teenager. I wasn't sure what the shapes meant, but he was different. Still him, but not quite. And I felt something swell in my chest. Pride, maybe, like I had done something right. Like I had helped him become this. Do you remember how magical that felt? Watching the screen change, not because you pressed a button, but because time had passed and you had kept him alive long enough for something new to happen. That whole day, I couldn't stop smiling. I checked the screen every chance I got, amazed at this new form, memorizing every pixel. I told Josh and he beamed, then showed me his. His had evolved 2 days before and we laughed at how similar they looked, like siblings almost. That night I placed it under my pillow again, just like always, but this time I whispered to it. Just one quiet sentence. You're doing great. And maybe I was saying it to him, or maybe I was saying it to myself. There was a morning when I didn't hear the beep. I don't remember what exactly had happened the night before. Maybe it was a school project that kept me up too late, or maybe I had fallen asleep watching a rerun of a cartoon. The flicker of the TV still echoing in my dreams. Whatever it was, I slept too deeply, too long. The little travel clock by my bed ticked away the minutes like always. But that day, I didn't stir at 6:20. Not even when the light began to spill in under the curtains. Not even when the Tamagotchi beeped faintly under my pillow. When I finally woke up, the first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't that kind of peaceful silence you get on a snowy morning, but the kind that feels wrong, like something's missing. I sat up slowly, still tangled in the blanket, hair sticking. Out in every direction, my fingers reached automatically beneath the pillow. And when I felt the smooth curve of the device, I smiled sleepily. That smile vanished the second I turned it over. He was there, but something wasn't right. The screen wasn't blank, but he wasn't moving. His little eyes were drooping. His usual bounce was gone. Surrounding him were tiny black piles, more than I'd ever seen before, and that awful little skull hovered next to his head again. I froze. That skull. That one awful symbol I had sworn I'd never see again. My chest tightened. I pressed the buttons, frantically navigating to the food menu, the medicine icon, the cleanup tool. He responded sluggishly, but he didn't bounce back like before. He was sick. He was weak, and I had done that to him, had let him down. A knot formed in my throat. That strange, sharp kind of guilt that feels bigger than you, bigger than the moment. I hadn't just missed a feeding or skipped a cleanup. I had forgotten him. Left him helpless in the dark while I slept peacefully, unaware that he needed me. The weight of that settled on my shoulders like something real. Do you remember that feeling? That ache that started in your stomach and rose? Up through your chest when you realized you had neglected your Tamagotchi? It wasn't just a game, it felt personal. Like that pixelated creature had trusted you and you had broken that trust. Even though it didn't speak, even though it couldn't cry out loud, the sadness on the screen was enough. That little face drooping, eyes, frown line. Barely animated was like a mirror for the part of yourself that didn't know how to forgive. I sat there for a long time, holding it in my hands, whispering apologies under my breath. I cleaned everything up, gave him food, medicine, waited for the happy face to return, but it didn't. Not right away. That's what made it worse. He stayed tired, like he didn't trust me yet. Like I had to earn back the joy. At school, I kept checking, hoping for improvement. During math, I snuck it out under the desk, and during lunch, I skipped a game of tag to sit quietly and monitor his screen. My friends noticed. Josh sat beside me, crunching a granola bar. "What's wrong?" "With yours?" he asked. "He got sick," I said, my voice low. He nodded, serious. Mine did too. Last week, I forgot him during a field trip. There was a long silence between us, one that only people who understood could share. Then he said something. "We'll never forget. They forgive you." Eventually, I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen and hoped he was right. The thing is, that guilt lingered longer than I expected. Even after my Tamagotchi perked up again, even after he smiled and jumped and danced like before, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed him, that I might do it again, so I became hyper-aware. I set 2 alarms. I checked the battery status. I wrote down feeding times on a sticky note and put it on my desk. But there was a deeper realization forming too, that caring for something meant carrying that risk. The risk of forgetting, the risk of messing up, the risk of letting someone down. And the only way through it was trying again, showing up even when you'd failed before. That night, I tucked him under the pillow as usual, but before I did, I pressed the buttons to make sure everything was perfect. Hunger bar, full. Happiness bar, nearly full. No poop, no sickness. He bounced once, then settled into sleep mode, his tiny eyes closing with a soft blink. I stared. At the screen long after he had gone still, I whispered again, like a secret, "I'm sorry." It felt silly, but it also felt necessary. The days that followed were quieter. I took care of him like I had before, maybe even better. But something had changed inside me. I no longer felt invincible. I understood now that even the smallest responsibilities could carry weight, that even a digital pet could teach you something about love and guilt and forgiveness. There were still times I made mistakes. Days when I got distracted by a pop quiz or a family visit or an afternoon lost in the woods behind the schoolyard. But now, every time I returned to him, I did it with more care, more gentleness. I treated his needs not as chores, but as reminders that I was capable of looking after something, and that sometimes looking after meant making peace with your own imperfections. One weekend, my parents took me to visit my grandparents. It was a long drive, and I had packed carefully Tamagotchi in my jacket pocket, fresh batteries in my backpack. But somewhere between unpacking and dinner, I must have set him down on the windowsill and forgotten. When I found him hours later, he was still there, still blinking, still okay. That small victory felt enormous. I had forgotten, yes, but he was fine. Not sick, not hungry, just waiting. And that's when I realized something else. He wasn't just fragile, he was resilient too. That night, I looked out the window. The stars scattered across the countryside sky and felt a new kind of peace. Not the kind that comes from doing everything right, the kind that comes from knowing you'll keep trying even when you don't. Because care isn't about perfection, it's about presence. And even when we fail, even when we forget, love is what brings us back. School had become a game of stealth. By the time I entered 5th grade, Tamagotchis were everywhere. Pocket-sized beeping lives in the hands of every kid from the front row to the back of the bus. They were with us at recess, tucked beside our trays at lunch, and more often than not, hidden beneath our desks during class. We became little caretakers, living double-life students on the surface, digital pet owners in secret. And no one was more suspicious of this than the teachers. It started slowly. At first, they didn't seem to notice. Maybe they thought it was just another toy craze that would fade. But when the beeping began to echo off classroom walls like sonar pings in a submarine, they realized something was up. Miss Harland, my homeroom teacher, was the first to speak up. I hear that again, I'm confiscating it. She warned one morning, her eyes narrowing behind square glasses. Confiscating it. The word alone made my stomach twist. For most kids, losing a toy for a few hours was annoying. For us, it was life or death. The Tamagotchi couldn't just be paused. If you handed it over, you handed over everything. Your streak, your progress, your promise to keep it alive. One day without care could undo everything. The idea that it would happen under your watch, in your backpack, was just out of reach on a teacher's desk. It was unthinkable. So we adapted. We became quiet strategists, masters of sleight of hand. I developed a technique I thought was genius. I'd wear my hoodie even when it was too warm, letting the sleeves hang past my hands. The Tamagotchi would stay hidden just inside, resting, in the curve of my palm, and I could press the buttons gently with my thumb through the fabric. If I timed it right, I could feed him, clean up after him, play a quick game while pretending to scribble notes. It worked. Mostly. But then came the day of the math. The room was silent except for the ticking clock and the occasional rustle. Of paper, I had just finished question 3 when I felt its ancient urgent vibration in my hand. My Tamagotchi was beeping. I froze. Not loud, but enough. Enough for someone to notice. I looked up slowly, eyes darting to Miss Harland. She was scanning. The room head tilted like a hawk mid-glide. I pretended to yawn, sliding my hand into my hoodie pocket. There it was, my little guy, hungry and surrounded by mess. I clicked once, twice. My heart was pounding so loud I couldn't even read the next question on the page. A tiny chirp escaped the speaker. I held my breath. Who has it? Miss Harlan's voice cut through the quiet. No one moved, not even to breathe. Her heels clicked across the floor as she walked between desks. Eyes flicking down to laps, pencil cases, bags. I gripped the Tamagotchi tighter, my palms sweaty now. I couldn't hide it in my backpack, it was too far. I couldn't. Pass it to a friend, it would draw attention. I had only one choice. I slipped it into my shoe. It was awful, uncomfortable. I could feel the edges pressing against my sock, digging into the side of my foot with every shift, but it was safe. And more importantly, it was silent. Miss Harlan paced once more, then returned to the front. Last warning. Next time I hear it, it's mine for the day. That evening, my Tamagotchi was a mess. I had survived, but barely. I had delayed his care long enough to stress him, and I paid the price in frowned faces and a full cleanup queue. I sat on the floor in my room, talking to him under my breath. I'm sorry, but we made it. I cleaned and fed him, and I let him fall asleep early. We both needed the rest. Every school day after that felt like navigating a minefield. There was always the chance of a beep slipping through during spelling tests, science videos, or reading circles. At one point, I started drawing little charts in the margins of my notebook, timing out when he might need attention next. I got better at predicting his needs, learning the rhythms of his virtual life so I could care for him during bathroom, breaks or passing periods. But it wasn't just about hiding him from the teachers. It became about preserving something fragile, something that wasn't part of the school day, that didn't have anything to do with grades or homework, something that was mine. I remember one day, mid-art class, when I looked across the room and caught the eye of another kid, Jake, who had just slipped his Tamagotchi into his sleeve. We gave each other the smallest nod. Not a victory, but of understanding. It was our little rebellion. Not against learning or rules, but against a world that didn't seem to understand the value of this small thing we cared for. To them, it was a noisy distraction. To us, it was a promise, a commitment, something alive in its own way, of course. Sometimes we got caught, like the day Casey forgot to silence hers during English. It let out a high-pitched chime during a poetry reading, and everyone turned to her at once. She tried to shove it into her backpack, but it was too late. Miss Reynolds took it and placed it on her desk without a word. Casey stared at it all class. So did I. I imagined it sitting there, helpless, getting hungrier by the second, I imagined. The sadness creeping into its pixelated face, and when the final bell rang, Casey rushed up and grabbed it like it had been underwater the whole time. She didn't even put it away. Just held it close and whispered, "I'm so sorry." That moment stuck with me more than the poem we had studied that day. The fear of being caught never fully left us, but neither did the determination. We found ways. Between books, beneath pencil cases, inside desks with tiny cracks, just wide enough for a button press. Looking back, it wasn't just about hiding, it was about protecting. Not just the Tamagotchi, but something else, something invisible. A sense of care, of responsibility, connection. When you're young, you don't get to make many decisions that matter. Adults tell you where to be, when to eat, what to wear. But a Tamagotchi gave us something different. It asked us to choose, to pay attention, to be gentle, and even in the middle of spelling drills or long division problems, that mattered more than anyone realized. By the time spring came around, the Tamagotchi craze had transformed our playground into something else entirely. We weren't just kids with digital pets anymore. We were caretakers, strategists, and troubleshooters. And above all, we had become a tiny, unspoken community. A network of advice, sympathy, and shared victories that unfolded each day between sips of juice and bites of peanut. Butter sandwiches. It always started the same way. Someone would walk up, clutching their Tamagotchi, with a look of panic on their face. Maybe their pet was sick, or wouldn't eat, or kept refusing to play the built-in game. Maybe it had already turned into a little angel and floated away, and they wanted to know why. Almost always, someone had an answer. I think if you play the game 3 times in a row, it gets happier, Nikki told me one Thursday, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she leaned in like she was sharing state secrets. Really? Said, already clicking through the menu. Mine's been frowning all morning. She nodded. Also, if you feed it a snack after it refuses the first meal, it sometimes changes its mood faster. It was like we were decoding a language together. Discovering the mechanics behind the magic, we compared button sequences, tested theories, and formed opinions on the best way to avoid the dreaded poop overload that could tank a Tamagotchi's happiness in seconds. At one point, Jake swore that naming your pet something with only 3 letters made it live longer. None of us could prove it, but a few kids restarted theirs just to test the theory. Don't overfeed it. Right. Mine got sick after 5 snacks in. A row, Danny warned one day, showing us his ailing screen. The little pixel pet lying on its side with a grim expression. We circled around like doctors at a bedside, each of us tossing out possible solutions. Did you give it medicine? Try cleaning it first. You have to make it play before giving it food. Eventually, someone figured out the sequence. The screen blinked, and the tiny creature sprang back to life, its face brightening into a smile. We all exhaled together like we had just performed a miracle. Lunchtime became our headquarters. We'd spread out on the benches and picnic tables, forming a half circle of chatter and beeping. Sometimes we would compare the evolution paths of our pets. Did yours grow legs? Is that a new shape? And other times we'd argue about whether happiness or discipline mattered more. Everyone had a theory, and everyone believed theirs was the right one. But even more than the tips and tricks, what bound us together was the care. We weren't competing. We were cheering each other on. When someone's Tamagotchi made it a full week without dying, there were high fives and actual cheers. When one of us had to reset after a particularly bad day, usually involving forgetting it at home or sneaking it into gym class, it wasn't just a loss. It was a communal moment of mourning. I was so close to getting the weird dinosaur one. Sophia sighed one day, staring at the little egg on her screen after a reset. Then my brother stepped on it. What? By accident? I dropped it in the kitchen. That was the day we began the backups and binders system. We helped her tape the cracks and clipped it inside a pencil case with a makeshift padding of tissue. From then on, we each had a version of the system. Some wrapped theirs in socks. Others layered rubber bands around the shell like armor. We cared, not just about our own pets, but about each other's. And slowly it became something bigger than the screen. On rainy days, when recess was held in the cafeteria or the classroom, We huddled together at the back tables, whispering over trays of spaghetti or packed sandwiches. That's when we started. Keeping notebooks, real ones, with hand-drawn charts and symbols. One page might show feeding schedules, another had doodles of the characters we'd seen evolve. Someone even made a happiness graph based on different sequences of care. It was nerdy, completely obsessive, completely beautiful. Our Tamagotchis gave us a reason to talk to people we might not have noticed otherwise. Kids from different classes, different grades. There was a 6th grader named Troy who had figured out how to pause his device without resetting the time. And even though he was 2 years older, he would sit with us and explain it step by step like we were his little siblings. Hold the A and C buttons down together, he said one day, and press B to pause. It doesn't work on every version, but most of them. That tip saved dozens of pets during gym class that week. Even the shyest kids had something to share. Mia, who rarely spoke up in class, was suddenly the expert on reading the mood of her Tamagotchi just by watching its walking pattern. She taught us how to predict hunger before the beeping even started. It sort of waddles slower when it's about to need food, she said softly, barely louder than the cafeteria noise. Watch. We watched. She was right. Little by little, this world inside our pockets became the glue between us. Our own secret ecosystem of caretakers and troubleshooters and hopeful pixel pet parents. It was silly and it was real all at once. And in a world where grown-ups made all the rules, we had created something of our own. That spring. I remember thinking for the first time that maybe this was more than just a phase, more than a toy, more than a bunch of kids pressing buttons. Under their desks, we were building something memory by memory, beep by beep. We were growing not just as caretakers, but as friends. We were practicing compassion, teamwork, patience. We were learning to ask for help and to offer it. To fail together and try again. We were in the smallest and most innocent way, learning how to love something. And we did it all during recess, one tip at a time. The first time mine died, I was sitting cross-legged on the carpet of my room, staring at the screen in disbelief. I had only looked away for maybe an hour, maybe 2, but that was all it took. The little creature, the one I had fed and played with and even paused during gym class, was gone. Replaced by a tiny gravestone and a blinking pixel ghost, drifting up into the void of the monochrome screen. I didn't cry, not really, but something twisted deep inside me. A tightness in the chest, a lump behind the eyes. I hadn't realized how attached I'd become until the loss showed up without warning. I had read stories about other kids losing theirs, about accidental deaths and missed alarms, but this was different. This was mine, my mistake, a Tamagotchi. I held it in my hands like it was fragile porcelain, even though I knew it was just plastic, and yet it felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of responsibility, of regret. I hadn't. Checked in time, I hadn't played enough. Maybe I'd ignored the beeping once too often, thinking it could wait until after dinner. It couldn't. After the quiet moment of grief, I did what all of us eventually did. I pressed the reset button. On the back, the screen went blank. Then, a tiny egg appeared again, a pulse with new life, waiting to hatch. The cycle had started over, but something in me had changed. This time I promised myself I would do better. I would be more attentive. I would never ignore a beep again, not even once. I named the new one differently, picked a shorter name, 1. I could type faster. I set a feeding schedule, even wrote it down on a sticky note beside my lamp. Morning, lunch, after school, before bed, it felt oddly serious, like a vow. Like I was at the beginning of something important, and not just a digital game. I had lost, but I had also learned. And that was something we never talked about openly in our little Tamagotchi circle. How much losing actually taught us. Some. Kids gave up after a death or two. They'd tossed their Tamagotchis into drawers or backpack bottoms, claiming they were over it. But I always wondered if they just couldn't handle the tiny ache of starting over. Because each new beginning came with a memory of the one before, a reminder of what had gone wrong, and what we hoped to do right this time. And so, we grew careful. We told each other stories in the cafeteria, trading tales like campfire confessions. This one got sick after I left it in my locker.
That one.
Died because I forgot to unpause it after school. Another didn't make it through the night because the batteries gave out. Each story came with a lesson, a moral, and a resolution to not repeat the mistake. One day, a kid named Evan, usually quiet, usually absorbed in books, approached our group holding his Tamagotchi close to his chest. "This is my third," he said, almost whispering. "I think this one's going to make it." We all nodded, as if welcoming a new member into a sacred order. "I made a chart," he continued, pulling a folded paper from his back pocket. "I track hunger, happiness, and sleep times. If I can make it 2 weeks, I'm going to get my mom to let me buy another one." It wasn't about winning. It was about redemption. Sometimes you'd hear the faint beep of death echo across the playground, and everyone would freeze. The person holding it would go quiet. Others would gather around, offering condolences and advice, and maybe a lollipop to ease the sting. It was a ritual of sorts. A small funeral held in silence, broken only by the soft pressing of the reset button. One day during lunch, it happened to Nikki. She had been talking excitedly about a new stage of evolution, something she hadn't seen before. Her eyes were glowing. But when she looked down to show us, her expression changed. Just like that, it was gone. "I don't get it," she said, blinking. "I just checked it this morning." We all leaned in, saying things like maybe it glitched, or you probably got the sick warning while you were in class. But she just stared at the screen for a moment, then let out a quiet sigh. Then calmly, she pressed the reset. No tears, no dramatics. Just a long breath, like someone lighting a new candle after the old one burned out. And then she smiled. "I'm naming this one Lucky," she said, "'cause he's going to live forever." We laughed. But there was hope in it too. That's what starting over really meant. Not forgetting the loss, but building on it. Choosing to believe that next time would be different, not because of luck, but because we had learned. We had grown, and in a strange, almost poetic way, it became a quiet metaphor for life. We were just kids, yes, but we were learning something grown-ups often had to be reminded of, that mistakes didn't have to be the end, that you could try again, that each new beginning carried not just a clean slate, but the echo of past attempts guiding your next step, that trying again meant believing again. There were days I felt exhausted chasing perfection. Days when I heard that chirp and rolled my eyes instead of rushing to help. Days when I slipped back into forgetfulness, lost in homework or cartoons. And sometimes, despite my best efforts, the screen still went dark. But always, I reset. And always, I promised to do better. Because each time I did, I was reminded of something both simple and profound. That love, even in pixel form, is a cycle of caring and failing and caring again. That what matters isn't just keeping something alive, but showing up when it needs you most. So I kept showing up, and in that way, through buttons and beeps and digital rebirths, I think we all began to understand what it meant to start over, what it meant to carry on, what it meant to care. Not just for a Tamagotchi, but for ourselves, for each other, for the fragile things that ask for our attention. In quiet little ways, in the end, each reset wasn't just about the pet, it was about the promise. We took it everywhere, not because we were told to, not because someone made it a rule, but because it felt necessary, natural even, like putting on socks or remembering your house keys. Leaving the house without it felt wrong, like something important had been forgotten. That tiny egg-shaped device, worn smooth at the edges from being handled too much, had become an extension of ourselves. Not a toy, not a gadget. Something more. Something alive in its own way. Mine had a keychain loop that I fastened to my backpack zipper, so I could hear it rattle slightly when I walked. I liked the sound. It was reassuring. It meant it was still with me, if I was going somewhere without. My bag. I moved it to my belt loop, or kept it snug in my hoodie pocket. I checked it in the car, on the bus, in grocery store aisles, at the laundromat. It's waiting in line. Always, the first time I brought it to a family dinner, I tried to be discreet. I kept it in my lap, hidden under the tablecloth, snaking glances. Every few minutes to make sure it was still healthy. It wasn't that I thought anyone would object. I just didn't want to be teased. Adults didn't understand. They thought it was silly or annoying or just another toy that made noise. It wasn't just noise to us. It was a voice, a cry, a nudge, saying, "I'm still here. Don't forget me." But then it beeped loud, shrill, in the middle of my aunt's story about her coworker who wore mismatched shoes to work. Everyone turned. My face went hot. "What's that sound?" she asked mid-sentence, frowning in confusion. My dad looked at me bemused. "Is that your little egg thing again?" I fumbled to quiet it, pressing buttons quickly while keeping it under the table. "It's just hungry," I muttered, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. Mom sighed, half amused, half resigned. "Why don't you feed it before dinner next time?" "But it wasn't hungry then," I said, not meaning to sound defensive. "Just got hungry now." My cousin, 2 years older and already over it, smirked. "You know it's not real." "Right," I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because it felt like the wrong question. After that, I stopped trying to hide it. If we were going out for pizza or visiting grandma, it came along like a sibling or a pet. No questions, just part of the routine. I had a little corner in my jacket pocket lined with tissues to keep it from getting scratched. Battery cover was tight, even taped it once before a road trip to keep it from falling off in the car. Family vacations were the ultimate challenge. Long drives, unpredictable schedules, hotel check-ins. Sometimes I'd sneak it under the covers of my hotel bed at night, shielding it from light so I could play without waking anyone up. Other times, I'd slip it into the beach bag, tucking it between sunscreen bottles and granola bars. Duffanitis for Renivin with a mind. At a roadside diner halfway through a road trip to Aunt Carla's in Ohio, I left it in the booth by accident. We were halfway to the parking lot when I realized I froze. "Wait," I said, spinning around. "Wait, I forgot it. I have to go back." My parents thought I meant a jacket or a toy, but I pushed past them and ran, inside the diner, heart pounding like I'd left behind something living, which in my mind I had. The waitress had already cleared the booth. Panic gripped me until I saw it sitting near the napkin holder, safe, waiting. I scooped it up with both hands, like a baby bird. The waitress gave me a look. "Is that one of those things that beeps all the time?" I nodded. He was hungry. I forgot him, just smiled. Maybe a little amused, maybe a little sad. "Don't forget your friends, hun." Never did again. Somewhere along the line, my family stopped questioning it. My dad would joke about feeding the alien in the egg. My mom would sometimes ask if I'd brought your child before we left for the movies. But they accepted it. They saw how seriously I took it, how invested I was. And in a quiet way, that felt like love. On longer trips, we made plans around it. Bathroom breaks and snack times became feeding windows. I had routines, systems, contingency strategies. I once got my little brother to hold it while I tied my shoes. He didn't know what to do with it, just stared at the screen and said it blinked at me. I told him that meant it liked him. He smiled and said, "Okay, I'll tell it a joke." I never saw anyone else's parents react the same way mine did. Some banned them entirely, said it was a distraction, a nuisance, a toy that taught nothing. But I felt lucky, and mine didn't always understand, but they didn't need to. They let me learn my own lessons. Let me carry the tiny screen through the world like it mattered. Because to me, it did. Even at family events, crowded tables and loud rooms, it was there. Tucked under napkins, hidden in pockets, resting beside juice boxes, always closed. And if it beeped, someone might raise an eyebrow, but no one told me to put it away. It had become a silent guest at the table, a presence. It's part of the family, even if it didn't eat rice or speak our language. I think about that sometimes now, about how much space something so small managed to take up in our lives. Not in a way that crowded out other things, but in a way that wove itself into the everyday, the same way pets do, or habits, or love. It didn't matter that it wasn't real in the traditional sense. What mattered was that we believed in it. We cared for it, built routines around it, and in doing so, we learned how to care, how to notice, how to prioritize something beyond ourselves. So yes, we brought it everywhere. Not because it asked, but because we wanted to. Because taking care of something truly caring means making space, even at the dinner table, even in the car, even in the middle of nowhere, with a granola bar in one hand and a blinking screen in the other. And maybe that's how it became more than a toy. Maybe that's how it became ours. Watching my Tamagotchi grow felt like witnessing a little miracle unfolding right before my eyes. Every time I pressed the buttons to check its status, a tiny world was blossoming on that small pixelated screen. The simple black and white dots and lines that made up its shape somehow managed to carry all the weight of a living, breathing creature, at least in my mind. That little digital life was changing, evolving, and growing, and with each new stage, I felt a surge of pride that was both sweet and quietly overwhelming. In the beginning, my Tamagotchi was just an egg, a blinking shape waiting to hatch. Remember how anxious I was, watching the screen and tapping the buttons as if I could hurry the process along? Then, finally, the tiny creature, blinking up at me, wide-eyed and innocent, as if asking, "Are you ready to take care of me?" It felt like the start of something precious, fragile, and incredibly important. I was proud the first time it learned to walk. Those little legs that seemed so fragile suddenly started to carry it across the screen with determination. It was a small thing, almost laughable to think about now, but then it was a milestone, a step forward. It was like watching a baby take its first steps, even if all I saw was a few pixels moving from side to side. It made me feel accomplished, responsible, connected. Every change meant I had done something right. Every evolution was a sign that my care mattered. If I forgot to feed it or clean up after it, the screen would show a sad face, and the pride I felt would quickly turn into guilt. But when the creature smiled or jumped happily, I was filled with a quiet sense of triumph. It was as if that tiny life was reflecting back everything I had given it. Did you ever find yourself smiling at that small screen, feeling like you had accomplished something no one else saw? I did many times. I remember sitting on the school bus, covertly pressing the buttons to check on it. And when I saw the happy face, a secret joy warmed me up from the inside. It was my little victory, hidden from the rest of the world, but monumental in my heart. Watching it grow also made me aware of the passage of time in a new way. Each stage, each beep, each pixel change marked a moment in my life. It was a slow, steady clock that reminded me how time moved forward, how things grew, evolved, and sometimes faded. Sometimes I would sit still just to watch it move through. Its routine, feeling the simple rhythm of feeding, playing, cleaning, and sleeping reflected back in the tiny elite creature's animated expressions. The different stages it went through weren't just a game mechanic. They were life lessons wrapped in nostalgia. I learned patience as I waited for it to evolve. I learned consistency because it required daily attention. I learned empathy by caring for something that depended entirely on me. And I learned pride, because every new stage felt like a medal I'd earned through dedication. Do you remember the first time your Tamagotchi grew into an adult? It felt like a big event. The screen changed, the creature's shape became more defined, and the routines I'd developed felt rewarded. It was a moment that felt like a graduation, a promise that my care had led to something lasting. I was no longer just a kid playing with a toy. I was a caretaker, a guardian, a friend. Every pixel shift was a story. From the wobbling toddler To the more confident adult, each new face on that screen was a sign of growth, not just for the Tamagotchi, but for me too. It was as if the little digital pet mirrored the changes happening inside me, making me more aware of responsibility and the joys that come with it. Sometimes when I look back, I realize how much pride I felt just from those simple black and white images. It was a reminder that growth doesn't have to be flashy or loud. It can be quiet, personal, and deeply meaningful. Those small victories on the tiny screen were victories I carried with me long after the device went silent. What about you, dude? You ever feel that same quiet pride, staring at the screen, knowing you had helped that little life become something more? I hope you did, because that feeling was one of the purest joys of that era. It was a reminder that caring matters, even in the smallest of ways. By the time I got to know the different evolutions, I had memorized every shape and face. I could tell the difference between a healthy Tamagotchi and one that needed urgent care just by a glance. Each form had its own personality, its own quirks, and that made it feel real. Not just a toy, but a companion that changed as I changed. It was amazing how something so small could feel so big. The screen was a window into a world where my care made a difference, where my attention shaped a life. And in that, I found pride not just for what the Tamagotchi had become, but for what I had become through the experience. So when you think back to those days, what do you remember feeling? Is it pride, responsibility, or maybe just a simple joy? For me, it was all of those things wrapped together, like a warm blanket on a chilly evening. A reminder that sometimes the smallest things teach us the biggest lessons by the end of this story. I hope you'll remember how those moments shaped you too, because they weren't just about a digital pet, they were about learning how to care, to grow, and to celebrate every step along the way. Eventually, as the years went by, the Tamagotchi that once occupied such a special place in my daily routine began to fade into the background of my childhood memories. It was a gradual process, almost imperceptible at first, the constant beeping, the pressing of buttons, the daily crawl. Those moments slowly gave way to new interests and distractions. Maybe it was because new games came along with brighter colors and more complex worlds. Maybe it was the natural flow of growing up, when the simple things that once felt so big no longer seemed quite as important. What, even as I moved on, the memory of that tiny digital pet never truly left me. Was it just pixels on a screen? Yes, absolutely. Just a handful of black and white pixels flashing in a rhythmic pattern. Yet somehow it felt so much more than that. It felt real, as if those small digital blips contained a tiny universe of feelings, responsibility, and connection. I sometimes wonder why that was. Why something so simple could make such a deep mark on my heart. Maybe it was the care it demanded, or the way it taught me to be responsible. Or maybe it was just the sheer magic of holding a little digital life in the palm of my hand and feeling like it depended on me. Looking back now, I realize how powerful that experience was, even though it was wrapped in the humble packaging of a plastic toy. It was one of the first times I truly understood what it meant to care for something other than myself. It was a lesson in patience, in empathy, and in the quiet joy of watching something grow because of your attention. Those were early seeds planted in my heart. Long before I even fully understood their value, sometimes I find myself smiling when I recall the times I checked my Tamagotchi before bed, worried it might be hungry or lonely or rushing to wake. Up early, bleary-eyed, just to feed it before school. It's a feeling that's hard to explain, but it's full of warmth and nostalgia, a reminder of simpler days when my biggest worry was keeping that little creature alive and happy. Even now, those memories bring a peaceful calm to my mind. Have you ever thought about how such a small, digital thing could create such lasting emotions? It's strange, isn't it? How something so minimal in form could fill so much space in our lives. But that's the beauty of nostalgia. It transforms the simplest experiences into treasures we carry forever. And for many of us, Tamagotchi was one of those treasures. Even as I grew older, moved on to other hobbies, and left behind many of my childhood toys, the Tamagotchi experience remained special. It was a symbol of a time when life felt slower, when my worries were smaller, and when a tiny pixelated friend could brighten my days, it was a reminder that even the smallest connections matter, that caring deeply, even if just for a digital pet can shape who we become. Sometimes I wonder if kids today, with their smartphones and tablets, can feel that same kind of connection to their digital companions, or if the magic of a simple low-race Tamagotchi is something unique to that era. Maybe it was the novelty, or maybe it was the perfect blend of responsibility and play that made it so special. Whatever it was real enough to teach me something important about love and care. Do you remember the way you felt holding your Tamagotchi? The nervous excitement mixed with tenderness? I do. And even though those days are long gone, the feelings still linger like a gentle whisper from the past. They remind me that sometimes the things we think are just games or toys are really lessons in disguise, lessons about connection, growth, and the simple joy of being responsible for another life. So, while I may have eventually moved on from my Tamagotchi, I never forgot what it meant to me. It was more than just a digital pet. It was a small, bright chapter in my childhood that shaped my heart. A reminder that care and love, no matter how small, can leave a lasting impression. Thank you for staying with me through this journey back to those quiet, pixelated days. I hope by the end of this story, you remember your own Tamagotchi moments and the quiet pride and care that came with them. Because even now, long after the beeping has stopped, that little digital life still feels real enough to warm the heart. Real enough to bring a smile. Real enough to remind us of the simple. Beauty and caring.